How's it going, everyone? And welcome in for another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Quite a few things to be able to talk about this week. We have a big pickup in the transfer portal from Gonzaga. We have another one from Washington State. The NCAA in talks about expansion once again to the NCAA tournament. So we will talk a little bit about what is entailed in that. The NBA finals are around the corner, and there are a few WCC players in that as well. We'll take a look at Santa Clara. So a number of things to get into, but I'm going to start with the WCC's release of the matchups for the coming conference season in the 2025-26 campaign. So some of the basics, the reminder that there are 12 teams this year with the addition of Seattle in the WCC. They will be playing an 8-team game schedule, so that is the same as a year ago. And what that means is that each team will have 4 teams that they only play once. 2 at home, 2 on the road. They will play every other team twice, home and away. So there's a number of really fascinating matchups, one-off matchups that we'll see in conference play. And we'll kind of go through at least a few of them as I've kind of like started to scroll through and look through the matchups. Again, like thinking about what these teams are going to look like, at least on paper, what they look like, and how these matchups are going to play out. So the first one that jumps out was a matchup that was definitely an upset, even though obviously Oregon State is a very tough place to play. Gonzaga will only play Oregon State once, and it will be at Gill Coliseum in Corvallis next season. That is the only time that these two will play in the regular season. Obviously, they could end up playing again in the WCC tournament. But that was a game Oregon State won last year at a period where the Zags were they were reeling at that stage. They also lost to Santa Clara in that window. So when we've seen the Zags struggle a little bit in that early part of January as they're making that adjustment from their really tough non-conference schedule into WCC play. And Oregon State played really well in that game. Obviously, Gonzaga had a number of things not go their way in that contest, but that's a solo matchup that absolutely going to have to watch. And then Oregon State, honestly, like Oregon State really lucked out when it came to the single matchups. They'll also only have to play St. Mary's once, but this time they'll have to go on the road to take on the Gales. These two matchups, again, like that matchup in Moraga was far more competitive than the matchup that they had in Corvallis. The game in Corvallis was really lopsided from the get-go, but the game in Moraga was far more competitive. So Oregon State with two pretty favorable matchups, the fact that they only have to play Gonzaga once, only have to play St. Mary's once, and the other two on their solo trips are Pepperdine and Portland. So Oregon State, I think, has a pretty good draw there. And I could say the same for Washington State because they also have two favorable matchups where they will have to play St. Mary's twice. They will have to play Gonzaga twice, but they will only have to play USF once, and that will be on the Hilltop. And they will only have to play Santa Clara once, and that one will be at home at the Palouse. So Washington State and Oregon State pulled some pretty favorable matchups in their last go-round in the WCC. Washington State, again, hosting Santa Clara, being on the road for USF, but then the other two, Pacific and San Diego. Now that Pacific one, obviously have to kind of watch that one as well because that was a matchup that Washington State didn't win at all this past year. They lost both matchups to the Tigers, both home and away. So Washington State still looking for its first win against Pacific as a WCC member, and they will only get one more shot at it in the regular season. And also looking at this again, mentioned that Oregon State only has to play Gonzaga and St. Mary's once each. But they're not the only team that has to play Gonzaga and St. Mary's only once. The other three, LMU, Pacific, and San Diego will all only have to play each of those teams once apiece, which, especially looking at those three, is what could change their fortunes for the WCC tournament, at least when it comes to seeding. The LMUs, the Pacifics, and the San Diegos, this could be the difference between a 10 seed and a 6 seed. This could be the difference in a lot of these matchups where that one game could get them, leapfrog them over a couple of other squads that have to still play Gonzaga or St. Mary's twice. Thinking about like Pepperdine still has to play them twice. You think about the likes of, obviously, San Francisco, Santa Clara still have to play them twice. Portland has to play them twice. But those four schools will only have to play Gonzaga and St. Mary's once a piece. So the one thing I also started to look at is what are some of the other matchups for some of the other schools? And I'm going to take one from each that I haven't already mentioned as far as individual matchups. So I've already talked about Gonzaga, talked about Oregon State, Washington State, USF, Santa Clara, St. Mary's, and also Pacific. So I'm going to start with LMU, and it is a matchup with a team we've already talked about. And I think the key one, the one to look for LMU, is when St. Mary's visits the Lions at Gersten Pavilion, because that is a game that last year, that building was a very difficult place to play for really everybody. Santa Clara lost their game there. Oregon State lost there. St. Mary's struggled a little bit there. This was not an easy place to play a year ago. And St. Mary's going into there is still going to be a tough place to get a win. Again, think about just a few years ago when LMU had its best year in a long time and they lost in that building. So this is the one thing you have to kind of see and keep an eye on with that LMU squad. This is going to be an interesting LMU team. As I talked a little bit more about them in the last episode, I'd encourage you to go back and kind of listen to what LMU has coming in. But the Lions, this matchup is a key matchup. They're only going to see St. Mary's once. They're going to only see Gonzaga once. So if they are to maybe make a magical run and we start talking about NCAA tournament, whatever else, these two games are immensely critical to that possibility. But the fact that they only have to play each of them once, I think is going to be beneficial for them when you start to look at what the WCC standings are going to look like and how that's going to help them get deeper into the tournament in Las Vegas. So the other one I'm going to mention also does involve LMU, but this one is more focused on its opponent, and that being Pepperdine. LMU at Pepperdine is only happening once this year, which this coastal rivalry between Malibu and LA is one that usually is circled on the calendar, but this game will only happen once. This year it will happen in Malibu. And again, just the one to watch. Pepperdine their matchups are going to be a little lopsided. I do see like they have LMU, they have USF Santa Clara, which they haven't particularly done well against. Oregon State is also on that schedule. This is a tough, these one-offs are tough for Pepperdine. But that LMU one, the fact that it's a rivalry game is the one I'm kind of keeping my eye on. And similar note on that is the next team. I'm looking at Portland, and they will only have to play Oregon State once, and they will be hosting the Beavers at the Chiles Center. And this was a game last year where it was not as easy as Oregon State probably thought it would be going into that matchup. That was the very first game of WCC play for Oregon State. Yes, they came away with the victory, but that Portland team was scrappy. They were competitive in that first matchup. Obviously, we know that Portland really kind of ended up behind the eight ball pretty quickly in WCC play and was one of the bottom seeds in the tournament. But this Portland team has some interesting pieces. I'll get into them in one of the coming episodes and just detail kind of what they have coming in, because if you look at what Portland has had talent-wise over the last 4 years, there's been a lot of talent coming in and out of the Pilots. They just have not been able to put it together for wins and losses. And that's one of the challenges that they have. And thinking about this matchup, it could be one of those trap games for Oregon State. Now, the next game involves two teams I have not mentioned yet, and I think that's why I have them matched up with each other. And it is the two teams who are at opposite ends of the WCC geographically from each other, and is San Diego when they head to Seattle. These two teams, San Diego has a lot of work to do. They finished at the bottom of the WCC this past year. They have some pieces coming in, so it's going to be interesting to see how quickly San Diego can turn it around. We saw 2 years ago that they continued to get better and better and were the surprise team in WCC play, but last year nothing really kind of came together for that squad. So that is a team to watch. And Seattle, this Seattle team is not going to be a pushover in year one in the WCC. I think the pieces they have brought in, the team that is moving over from the WAC, this is going to be a team that's going to remain competitive all year long. I don't quite see them as a lower third team. I think they're going to be somewhere in the middle of the pack of the WCC. And this sort of matchup is one of those like, hey, you have to have these matchups against the San Diegos, the Pepperdines, the Portlands. These are the teams that if you are going to be in the middle of the pack or higher, you have to be able to handle your business against those squads, especially at home. So the Toreros going up to see the Red Hawks in Seattle is one of those key matchups for me. And then one more for Seattle, because it is a one-off for them, is San Francisco coming to town. And I think one of the things that's going to be interesting to see is where Seattle plays for some of these marquee matchups in the WCC. Now, their building only holds 999 people, so we know that this is not a place where you will see Gonzaga play. You won't see St. Mary's play there. You won't see Washington State or Oregon State play there. Seattle, when they do play their bigger games, move over to Climate Pledge Arena. So this is going to be partly scheduling. There's going to be partly seeing who is going to have a larger draw. San Francisco could be one of those larger draws, going up to the Pacific Northwest and into Seattle. Them playing in that building, I think, is going to be a lot of fun, especially that green and gold going into a building that also does host a team that plays in green and gold in the Seattle Storm. So USF, who has had one of the better off seasons of anyone in college basketball, really, and especially in amongst mid-major teams, Don's hitting the road to take on Seattle is going to be a really fascinating matchup as we get into conference play. And thinking about just big matchups, the fact that we see all of these success stories with the WCC and a lot of talent in the WCC, it does obviously translate to the NBA. And we have 5 representatives from the WCC who will be in the NBA Finals, 2 from Indiana and 3 from Oklahoma City. Lloyd Peters, one of the assistant coaches for Indiana, went to Santa Clara, played for Santa Clara, class of 89. You have Andrew Nemhard, obviously on that Pacers squad as well from Gonzaga. On the OKC side, Jalen Williams, obviously we know, coming from Santa Clara, Chet Holmgren on that squad as well. And then also the reminder that Alex Dukas is from St. Mary's is also on the Thunder roster. So you have 5 reps from the WCC involved in these finals, which is always kind of fun to watch. Obviously, we know that Nemhard, Holmgren, and Williams are all going to have major impacts in this series. And we will see 2 schools, no matter who wins, end up being able to claim another NBA champion. And this one is just going to be fun. I mean, honestly, like these NBA playoffs, I typically kind of like watch in and out because of the Warriors' involvement or whatever else. As being a Bay Area native, of course, I'm a Warriors fan. But watching these playoffs, like this has been some of the most competitive playoffs I think we've seen in a really long time. and especially in a window where there doesn't seem to be the one quote dominant team in the league. There, you don't have a Warriors of a few years back. You don't have those Spurs teams. You don't have the Bulls. You don't have the Lakers. You don't have these dominant dynastic type teams in the league right now. And the parity has made it so much more competitive and has really made this year a lot of fun to watch. So again, those 5 in the NBA Finals, looking for both of these teams, really looking for the first NBA championship in Oklahoma City and the first championship for the Pacers. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch that series go on. So one of the things I talked about and teased was Gonzaga's biggest addition, I think, of the offseason, and that's the pickup of Grand Canyon's Tyon Grant-Foster. This was a guy who just terrorized St. Mary's in the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago. This was someone who did struggle last year. He did miss some games amidst whack play for the Lopes. He played in 27 games last year, still started in 18, 15 points per game, nearly 6 rebounds. The one thing that Grant-Foster gives the Zags is he gives them a dynamic score. He gives them length. He's 6'7". He gives them a guy who you really can just give the ball to and get out of the way. And sometimes that has been a challenge over the last few years. Something, when you think about the NCAA tournament, what do you need is you need that elite guard play, someone who can take over a game on a moment's notice. And that is what Grant-Foster is capable of doing. We talked about his performance against St. Mary's in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago. 22 points, 7 rebounds against St. Mary's. He followed that up with 29 points and 8 rebounds against Alabama. This past tournament, he had 23 points against Maryland. Grant-Foster gives them a dynamic that they have probably been missing since Jalen Suggs was still on this roster. And yes, that's been a few years. Now it's 6 seasons without someone like that on the roster. And when you look at the rest of the pieces that Gonzaga has already brought in or were able to hold on to, you have Braden Huff, you have Graham Ike, Braden Smith now comes off of redshirt, and then you have Adam Miller or Jalen Worley being that 5th starter. One of them will obviously be the 6th man coming off the bench. But this is a much better starting 5, I think 1 through 5. Not to say that obviously like replacing Ryan Nembhard is an easy thing to do, because it's not. But I think you ended up with upgrades above a Caleb Battle, above a Michael Ajayi. This starting 5 is better than the starting 5 from a year ago, from 2 years ago. And that should be the thing that if you're looking at the Zags ceiling this year, and maybe it was overstated last year of like, oh, that's a potential like Final Four team or whatever else, because clearly that team had a lot of issues, a lot more than maybe we actually thought that they had when it came to getting deeper into the tournament. This team has size. This team has more defense. This team has dynamic scores on it at multiple levels. And that is the thing that they missed. That is the thing they now have with this roster. And I mentioned it in a short that I did a couple of days ago that this now looks like a top 15 team. This does look a little bit more, to me now, it looks more legitimate as a team that can get deeper into the tournament because of the pieces that they have. And these are the types of pieces that you need to be able to advance further into the tournament. And obviously we know the Zags missed the Sweet 16 for the first time in about a decade this past season. So there obviously is room for growth. There is that appetite that to get back to the Sweet 16, to get back to the second weekend and further. And that this Gonzaga team is still looking like the team to beat, even though, yes, St. Mary's has been the conference champion, the regular season champion the last 2 years. To me, it still feels like the Zags are the one to beat, because when they are right, they play like the best team in the conference. And in WCC play, that hasn't always been the case, that they play like the best team. And that is where there's been that maybe level of inconsistency, whether it be just being worn out a little bit from their non-conference as they get back in WCC play or whatever it is. This team does, when it's playing to its ability, it can play with anybody. And we saw that even in the NCAA tournament when they made that huge comeback against Houston. All right, so I want to take a look at this transition a little bit to a team that's going to be somewhere in the mix, probably middle of the pack in the WCC race, and that is Santa Clara. And obviously, this is a team that lost a lot. They lost their entire starting five. Tilly, gone. Ball, gone. Stewart, gone. O'Neal, gone. Bryan, gone. Add Cam Tung. Add Kozi Akamedu. You lost a ton from this squad. And it's not that the cupboard is bare, but there's going to be some growing pains with this squad. You do bring back Brenton Napper. You do bring back Jake Ensminger. You do bring back Elijah Mahi. Those three are good pieces, especially Mahi I thought, was their best playmaker a season ago. The fact that he returns is a really positive sign for the Broncos. Having Ensminger back is another big boost. I thought he started out a little slow last year, but he really started to play better as the year went on. Brenton Napper was really critical down the stretch. Now, the one thing that we know about the Santa Clara team is like they're going to score, that this team knows how to get the best out of its offense. It's always been about, can they play enough defense? Can they limit their turnovers and not become as almost one-dimensional, because they really rely so heavily on that three-point shot that they need to have something else other than that to be able to break that funk whenever they do get into a slump. I mean, this is a team that we saw them hit 18 threes in a game, but they're also capable of hitting two. So this is a team that needs to be more consistent and find other ways to score the basketball outside of just relying on the threes for so often. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the key additions that they have made. And I'll start with Garrick Norman, who's coming over from Michigan State. This was someone who spent the last 2 years with the Spartans. He entered as a top 100 recruit, did not get a whole lot of playing time while at Michigan State, but this is someone who's going to add some toughness. This is someone who's going to add some depth to the backcourt. This is someone who is going to give them another piece to really kind of compete with the likes of a St. Mary's and a Gonzaga and a USF. Because again, like the one thing you have to remember is that all those teams, the thing they all have in common is that they are big, long, and strong. And that is what Santa Clara was last year with the core that they had. Norman brings that to the squad as well. And of course, the toughness is going to be there coming from a Tom Izzo program and having been there for 2 years. Another one adding to that front court that's going to be critical is Chris Tajo coming over from Iowa. He only played 11 games this past year, but this is someone who brings some legit size. He's going to bring some toughness, and his game is going to be more inside, where that wasn't necessarily always the case with, say, like a Christoph Tilly, who really developed that outside shot nicely, but we didn't see him be kind of like maybe that enforcer inside on the defensive end. And that is something that Tajo is going to give them a little bit more of. That is something that Santa Clara needed. They sometimes got, while they were a good rebounding team, sometimes that started to go by the wayside. And the consistency that Santa Clara needs from doing that sort of thing is critical when you think about some of the losses that they picked up throughout the course of the season. Again, back to the North Dakota State, back to Stanford, back to the LMU losses. These are games they should not have lost, but could not get over the hump, could not hold on in those contests, and they need to do a lot of the little things right. And Norman and Tajo should be able to help them do that. Now, the other one that's coming in, another transfer, and this one I'm going to have to make sure I am pronouncing it correctly, Alexander Gavaliugov. Gavaliugov coming over from Villanova. This was someone who in the Adidas Euro Camp last year averaged 15 points per game, 5 rebounds, over 6 assists. He missed most of last season due to an ankle injury, so having him back for this season is going to be obviously having him up and running and looking like his normal self early is going to be a huge boost for Santa Clara in this season. And thinking about, again, like 6.3 assists, the one thing that I've talked about for a number of years with Santa Clara is that they really haven't had a true point guard. And that is something that Gavaliugov could end up bringing. That is something that he could provide. And it is something that is desperately needed. They need someone who, at the end of a game, can be the one who runs the show, the one who's calming everybody down, and really is giving them that veteran presence, that experience that you need to have in these close, tight games. Because we saw time and time again the value of an Augustus Marshallonis, the value of a Ryan Nembhard, the value of a Marcus Williams. You see the value of those sorts of point guards who just know how to run the offense. They know what all the looks are. They don't have to be the guy, but they know how to get the rest of their team in position to get the best looks and get them rolling in the right direction. Now, another one that the one thing that this team does so well over the years is score. This is a very high octane offense, and one of the freshmen coming in should be able to help a lot with that. KJ Cochran, a 4-star recruit, according to 24/7 Sports, 6'3" guard. This is kid coming out of Pennsylvania that really kind of lit up the scoreboard everywhere he went. He averaged 21 points, 6 rebounds, 2.5 assists this past year. He was national prep, 3rd-team All-American. He was All-State, 1st-team All-EPL honors, the second-rate guard in Pennsylvania, all of the accolades. This is someone who's going to give them more offense. This is someone who's going to give them that ability to stretch the floor. Santa Clara loves to shoot the 3, and this is someone who's going to be able to help them do that very early on in his college career. And then one more look is Bradley Longcore III, a 3-star out of Illinois, finalist for Illinois' Mr. Basketball in 2025. And we know that Santa Clara has had some success with taking kids from Illinois, Brandon Pajemski. So they know what the type of profile is for these kids. They know the type of profile for the sort of players they're going to bring out of those programs. And Longcore averaged 17 points per game last year, shooting 59% from the field, 4.6 assists, 3.2 rebounds, a little bit of everything, which, again, very much like Pajemski showed in his 1 year at Santa Clara. So a lot to like there. And we'll see as a true freshman if he's going to be able to kind of break that rotation with Napper and Norman and Cochran. I think there's going to be at least like and Mahi, there's going to be a lot of competition to get those minutes. So we'll see how much Longcore then enters into the equation there. And then the other addition, they needed some more size. It was like we talked about, like a lot of the other guys that are here, is like Tajo, Aboye also coming back, but they needed someone else who could fill in at that front court spot. Now, again, another freshman, so we'll see how quickly he can enter into the rotation. But Francis Chukwudi Bello, 6'10" center, originally from Nigeria, moved to Texas in 2018. This kid was the 14th ranked center in the class of 2025. A long, impressive list of who else was recruiting him. Auburn, Kansas, Texas, Memphis, Alabama, Florida State, Michigan State, Kansas State, Nebraska, Xavier, Ole Miss, TCU, SMU, Vanderbilt, and he went to Santa Clara. Obviously, we know that Herb Sendek knows how to recruit. We know that he is really good at finding talent that's going to want to play for Santa Clara. So this is a big get. And especially when you're winning recruits over that list of schools, bringing him to Santa Clara, seeing what he's going to be able to be capable of. Again, bringing someone with legit size to that squad is critical, because Gonzaga is big, because St. Mary's is big, because USF got bigger, because of the likes of Washington State and Oregon State, who are also big. Like, you have to be able to match that size. And Santa Clara, who has done a very good job of that over the years. I mean, they are usually one of the biggest teams in college basketball, and they went out and filled that spot pretty well, in the off season. Now, about Santa Clara overall, thinking about this squad, the one thing, unlike USF, it feels like that there are more unknowns about this squad than there is a USF. Maybe about the same number of unknowns as an Oregon State, maybe the same, maybe less so than Washington State. But it feels like that's about where this team is. That's about the pack of teams that this squad is in. USF is on its own to me with St. Mary's and Gonzaga. But Santa Clara, Washington State, Oregon State, I'm even going to throw LMU and Seattle in there. I think that grouping, and maybe even Pacific, they're going to be vying for a lot of these middle tier in the WCC spots. And the Santa Clara team there's a lot of talent, but it's a lot of unproven talent. And showing it in the non-conference, how quickly you can get up to speed, especially if there is aspirations for the NCAA tournament, they have to hit the ground running. So this is going to be their camps in the fall are going to be critically important to all get on the same page and get this motor going sooner rather than later as they go into November and December into the non-conference. All right, so tease it a little bit. I want to talk about the NCAA tournament and the expansion from 68 to possibly either 72 or 76. This came up as during the Big 12 spring meetings. Charlie Baker, the NCAA president, was asked about expansion and said that it could happen as early as this coming season, which obviously comes as a shock to most everybody around college basketball. And yes, the talks have been happening. We know that it's out there, but it was only 2 months ago that Senior VP of Basketball, Dan Gavitt, said that the decision was likely not to come anytime soon. So now that we hear that it could come as early as this season, should come as a shock. And maybe it's the influence of being in those Big 12 meetings, talking with Greg Sankey over the SEC, what's happening with the Big 10, these big conferences putting pressure to expand the tournament so that they can get more teams in, which obviously anyone who has watched what is happening absolutely believes that's what's going to happen. It will not be the deserving mid-major who gets in. There'll be more of these undeserving low-tier power conference teams that end up getting in, and we'll get a couple more poor first four, I guess they wouldn't even be first four, first eight, whatever matchups. And that's what we'll end up seeing. We'll end up seeing sloppier basketball in those first couple of days of the NCAA tournament. And that is just not something really anyone wants to see. No one wants to see those matchups be played. It's a bad look for the sport. It's a bad look for college basketball, in my opinion, to see more of those sorts of games. Now, if you tell me 72 to 76 and I'm going to get more of those deserving mid-majors in, I'm in. That's what I would rather see. But I don't believe that's what's going to happen. I don't believe most of you watching believe that either. We know that what the NCAA is going to likely do is push for those teams, and then we will see 16 SEC teams get in. We will see 14 Big 12 teams get in. We'll see 2 mid-majors get at-large bids. That'll be it. That's what, in my head, is the actual likely scenario. And I say mid-major, that maybe I'm not talking about the Mountain West or the WCC, but of like the Big West, who probably should have had 2 teams in, had 1. When you look at Indiana State a season ago, they should have been in. There are any number of teams that were deserving and just get left out in the cold, and I don't trust the NCAA to actually make the right decision here. I'd fully expect, if they were to expand, when they expand, that it's of course going to be the mid-major that ends up getting the short end of the stick. And then one final note here, Washington State also did had one more pickup, Brunel Madzu, coming over from Finland, the 6-foot guard. He'll be coming as a first-year player, but he's 20 years old, so someone who's a little bit older and will still have plenty of college eligibility left. 9 points per game. He shot 49% from the field. 3.1 assists for the European Youth Basketball League, where his team won the under-20 Finnish national championship. He joins a pretty crowded backcourt. Thrasterson, Favors, Garrett, Wynot, Glass, Morton. But this is someone who gives them a little bit more of a true point guard, which isn't really what they have on the rest of this roster. So something that is missing. And obviously going to probably get a little bit of a shot because he's a little bit older. He's going to have a little bit more experience than some of the other guys on this roster. So we'll see what Washington State is able to do moving forward. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to follow along on social media at Post by Zach and at unofficial WCC pod. Hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel and follow along on there and all on your favorite streaming services as well. Thanks a lot for everybody for watching, and I will catch you later.